Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate truth.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back here. KNDZ, KGLN, the internet, and podcasting and whatever. This is Rick Wagner getting it right. I'm very glad to be back here this week. Last week I tried to, I thought, lighten things up a little bit by spending a show talking about something completely different than politics per se. Something I was interested in, and I had talked to a few other people, and they were too. I thought it might be something to just spur people's interest, and that was about, some of these ancient civilizations and so forth. But it doesn't seem like that. It doesn't seem like that we can get away from bad things. Doesn't matter each week after we go. This has been a very tough week. All of you know that. I don't really know what to make out of it. I was not really, recovered, you want to say that, from the horrific video of that poor Ukrainian girl. I don't know how anybody can look at that and not just be, sickened, outraged. I don't know. It's just way too much. And to think that some people, apparently there were some postings out there that somehow had it in their head that there's some sort of racist thing going on here, and there was somehow some kind of weird justification. And I can't even follow that kind of reasoning. I don't want to either. It's not reasoning. It's just a explosion of insanity from people who are so hyped up about some particular point of view that they can no longer see reality. That kind of person is not good to be around, and they're probably not good to be in society without being watched a bit to see what they're up to. It was crazy disappointing. What was bothersome about that, there were so many things that were bothersome about that video, but if you watch him, the perpetrator in that video, there are people on that train when he's just sitting there. There's two other people. Doesn't bother them. No problem, apparently. A young girl who's dressed in her pizza uniform comes in, sits down, looks to me like she weighs probably 95 pounds or something like that. And at this point, apparently he sees something wrong with that, or he sees an easy victim. I'm not sure we're ever going to tell. And you watch him calmly unfold his knife, and then, of course, attack and slash at her, and she passed. Not without a great deal of fear, as you can see. This is the kind of behavior that obviously cannot be tolerated or explained. I don't really care. If there's something out there that's causing more than one person to behave like that, I might care about that. But personally, and I think many people feel the same way, his motivations would be fine to know, but I don't really care. The fact that we're spending any time or money or interest on this character is a bad thing as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm happy to say everybody deserves their day in court. And even if you have video or a confession or things like that, you still need a process. If we start doing away with the process, then that starts getting into that tricky area of vigilantism or lawlessness. Now, just because a lot of people in government apparently are lawless doesn't mean we should follow their example. So that's fine. Let's get the train rolling on that. Let's get the evidence in there. Let's get a jury, and let's get him out. And I'm hoping that there is some sort of terminal velocity on his journey here, but I don't know that at this point. The idea of feeding, clothing, and putting up with him for the next, however long, in custody of the state is not something I really like very well. At some point, people have decided, let's call them, can we call them people, really? I mean, when you're so far off the grid like that, I don't think so. When some type of being gets far enough off of the path of civilization, then it's hard to even see them as something you want to spend a lot of time supporting. Now, like I said, I want to see the process. We have to follow a process in this country, as much as sometimes people get upset at it. It can be fixed. It's not a very good one in many instances. It goes on far too long. It takes too long. There's too many ways to wiggle out of things in the criminal side. And now we have judges, prosecutors, and occasionally juries that don't seem to think that the law is all that important, or that their job isn't somehow to defend others from the actions of a few, or decide if those actions are bad. The prosecutors like Alvin Bragg and Fannie Willis, and we could go on and name these characters that have gotten elected, especially in these larger cities. Their idea is that you should just leave things alone because there's some basic problem with the way the law was written, enforced, originated, something like that. This is the people's fault who live there. I mean, I'm not saying everybody. I'm not saying everybody voted for these characters, but somebody did. These people got into office on the basis of someone thinking they would do a good job. Now, I don't know how that happens. And what disturbs me almost as much as their attitude, that is the prosecutor's attitude, is whatever it is that's going on with the voting electorate. Is it complete indifference? Is it the results of a one-party system? Which I kind of think is true in some of these instances. It's amazing at the ineptness that can be seen in people that arise out of cities or states even, or where there's a machine at work and there is no real competition. Once you push your way through some primary or something like that, you have the right support, the right people in the party or whatever. It doesn't really matter if you're capable. And so we see that. Yeah, that's part of it. The other part is I think that people don't pay attention. They don't care. And the people that are tuned into this kind of stuff, they show up. And the reasons they show up may not be all that great for the rest of society. So if we're not going to pay attention to these kinds of things, local elections, whatever the case may be, then this kind of thing can happen. And remember, some of the stuff that's going on in this, like Charlotte, I mean, I don't know if you listen to the mayor, the lady that's the mayor's kind of comments on that. Yeah, not exactly a law and order person. And as much interested in the victimology of the perpetrator as what happened. I wish that I could offer some kind of idea about that, how people get that way, but I have no idea. I don't know how you get so cut off from the reality of what you see. But somebody elected her. Somebody stepped by while she undoubtedly appointed some inept, very woke, probably, people in her administration and started pulling the town down into whatever it is that allowed this to happen. And of course, once again, we come back to the problem of local politics. People don't follow them very well. I'll bet if you went out on the street in Charlotte and just randomly asked 10 people in the downtown area, people who were just, not somebody sleeping in the park at night, but just regular people, who the mayor was, they wouldn't know. And I think that's a problem. These people are close to you, assuming, wherever you're in a city or something. They're doing things that affect you deeply. Yet most people don't know who they are or anything about them. So that allows a fairly small group of activists, sometimes well-funded by outside groups or people, to get all sorts of goofy folks in office that perhaps if everyone knew something about them, it wouldn't happen. So you wonder, the system isn't broken per se. It's the participation that's become a problem. The amount of people that want to participate and spend some time learning something about their own government Seems to be dropping off. We'll be back. Hey everybody, thanks for sticking around. We appreciate it. Rick Wagner here, getting it right here in KGLN, KNZZ, various other places. In the last segment, I know that I was going off, and I will continue to go off on this local politics angle. When you go backward from an event, it's like this event and we'll get talking a little bit about this Charlie Kirk situation, but you guys have heard so much of it already. But if you go backward from this Irina, I can't say her last name very well, so I'm not going to try and screw it up. But in Charlotte, if you start going backward to how this happens, yeah, there's a person there that you have to blame. You cannot disentangle them from the system that has allowed them to exist within it and not be properly controlled, watched, jailed, whatever the case may be. But it's important to go backward through that, and we're seeing that. I mean, this character, 14 different arrests. Many of you know that. Some of them for fairly serious stuff. He's also undoubtedly has a serious mental health problem. That's too bad. I don't care. However, as time goes by here, his mental health condition is going to get worse and worse. The longer he talks to counsel and the more it becomes apparent that they're going to try and do, I would guess, what we used to call NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity, kind of deal with him. I mean, what have you got? You got video evidence. You have him pretty much wandering around where everybody can see him, so you have eyewitness evidence. Speaking of which, you have a very troubling thing is, well, this happened. Nobody did anything. Now, I know he's a fairly large guy and he's waving a knife around. I don't expect just everybody to jump in there and perhaps themselves be seriously injured. But there's just nothing. And I saw a little bit, and this dried up fast, so I'm not sure if it dried up because there wasn't a whole lot of it going on or people were too ashamed of it. But apparently some people were, of course, filming this on their phones. What's wrong with people? I mean, we've talked about this before. This whole phone thing is completely out of control. Not only is it out of control in terms of how it's controlling people's lives, but I don't know how many times you see something horrific happening and no one's doing anything except holding their phones in front of them, trying to get it, I guess, to get some likes on, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever the case may be. And they also, and I've said this so many times, but it's weird, they act like by holding their phone up and recording something, that takes them out of the reality of the situation. It seems to put up an imaginary barrier between them and what's actually happening. I think that they become convinced at some back part of their minds that they're watching TV or some movie or something that isn't real. That's a pretty strange thing. It's relatively new with people. I haven't really seen that before. We see a lot of it now. And then you have this video of this character on board the train walking around. This is just unbelievable. Dripping blood, and people looking at him. Once again, nobody very interested in what's going on with him, I guess. And then he goes and sits down. He changes his red hoodie and sits down. So he knows that he's been identified. This is not a complete maniac that just goes crazy and thinks that people are space aliens and whatever the case may be and starts attacking everybody. I mean, that's bad enough. I'm not wishing for that. This is somebody who had a little thought going into this. Now, he says that there's material in his body. Now, many of you know that it is a common thing with schizophrenic personalities, particularly paranoid schizophrenic personalities these days, to imagine that there is some sort of device that's either controlling them or been implanted in them. Now, remember, many times these people feel out of body in the sense of communication. They're communicating with something that feels like it's outside themselves. This is a portion of this mental disease, apparently. This character thought that there was, he called it material, that was implanted in his brain at some point. Now, this is what made him do it. There might be a little truth to that, but it looks far too calculated to me. He waits. He sees a vulnerable person. He has some sort of calculation about who he should attack, and does it, and then goes away, changes his clothing to some extent. This is not a complete maniac. This guy has some serious mental health problems, but pretty sure he knew what he was doing. Now, he doesn't think he does now, and by the time he gets to court, he won't remember doing anything. Something would have taken over his body. He doesn't remember. I mean, this will be the story. This gray area with some of these situations where the person is crazy, no question about it. But they also are not so crazy that they don't know what they're doing. See, that's the real standard. It's not, are you crazy? It's, are you no longer able to know right from wrong? Or have any kind of idea about what your actions are taking place? Of course they're crazy. There's a lot of crazy people out there that commit crimes. If we decided to let people off because they were crazy when they commit crimes, we'd probably be able to get a lot of people out of the penitentiary. Quit supporting them. Get them back on the street like we have with the homeless, drug problem, mental health, the whole thing. Let's just add a little more to that. No, that's not the situation here. We have a very serious mental health problem, period. And it isn't because there's more crazy people, although it seems like that. It's because we're not doing anything with them. And we've talked about this before. The whole idea of mental institutions, loony bins, as some people refer to them, and things like that are pretty much gone. The population that you see in some of the mental hospitals, compared to what it was maybe 35 years ago, or a little longer, is really dramatic. This is because we've changed, by we, I mean society, by that I mean ACLU and things like that, have changed the way we define crazy and the way we treat it based on some bad things that have happened in mental hospitals and institutions over the years. No question that there were some terrible wrongs done in those. The problem is we seem to live by this anecdotal kind of stuff anymore. If there are 80% of the people that are controlled, they're not abused, they're kept from harming other people, and then there's another percentage in there where their treatment is not as good as others, it's not, the key to fixing that isn't letting everybody go and putting them on the street, say, oh, we're going to mainstream them. Mainstream them? They think they have a chip in their head that's telling them to attack people. Exactly what do you mainstream that? And a lot of it can be addressed with meds. The problem is that, and you guys know this, is that very often these folks go off their meds almost as soon as they go out the door from a hospital. And very quickly they're right back where they were to begin with. This whole idea that, a danger to yourself or others has been narrowed down to where as soon as you seem to be okay right now, you take your bottle of pills and see you later. And, of course, that isn't going to work for 90% of these folks. We decide that it is. We decide that's better than creating an institution and trying to make sure there isn't problems in that institution that we would find abhorrent. And usually that involves regulation and inspection. The government does most things pretty poorly. Some of them, it does decent, but the further it gets away from the main mission of government, the worse it becomes. Well, this is part of the keep the citizens safe piece of it, and it's a pretty important piece of it. It's all part of that law enforcement, letting society function kind of thing. And we can fix this. I mean, we can't make it completely go away. There were nutty people. Nutty people have been roaming the streets of cities since there were cities. Probably before, when they were villages. We did have the village idiots, of course. And at that point, they mainly transitioned into local politics. But at any point, these are not new problems. And we can address them. Can we make them completely go away? No. I'd like to, but that's just not realistic. But we certainly can do a lot better job. And we have to be realistic about how do you address these people that are violent, crazy, some sort of ism out there, an ist. There's so many of them now. That's also worked into this. I mean, sometimes it's not usually just one thing. And if they're dangerous, and we should have some criteria for that, and we should have a system to go through. And I know if you start thinking of the system, you start thinking of the legal system now, and you think, oh, geez, what's that how much is that going to cost, and how screwed up will that get at certain points? Yeah, that's probably going to happen. But that means we need to monitor it ourselves to make sure it stays online as much as possible.
The Twilight Zone.
Yes, the Twilight Zone, or as we think of it, California politics. At any rate, I'm back. I appreciate you guys putting up with me ranting again about trying to get people to pay attention to what's going on close to them. It's so much easier to see things through a telescope than it is to look out your front door sometimes. It's frustrating. But you know what part of it is, and I think this is true for me, and I think it's for a lot of people, is if you look at things locally, it requires some effort because you see them and you realize you need to do something about it. If you look at things nationally, your ability to fix this stuff is more limited. I'm not saying you can't, but it doesn't seem as immediate or direct or requiring the kind of effort that going out and trying to find somebody who isn't crazy to run for city council or school board and then supporting them and doing some work with it. That's not easy when you have a busy life. But without doing that, look the way things are going. I'm telling you, in New York, they're probably going to elect this Zoran, the entertainer, or whatever he is, as mayor. Because no matter how hard they're working, they're probably not going to get a huge turnout. I mean, if they get 30% of the voters in that city that actually vote, I'll be a little bit surprised. If they get to 40%, he probably wouldn't win. But he's going to turn out, like in all these things, a very tightly driven base that's going to get out there and vote. And there's not going to be anything really organized enough to probably stop him. I hope I'm wrong. And yeah, we have too many people in the race there. I like Curtis Sewell. He'd make a good mayor, probably. I mean, he couldn't be much worse. But he's not going to win. Eric Adams, not going to win. Cuomo, the way things now, probably not going to win. Somebody's got to get out of that race so they don't split the vote. And at least give a shot at keeping this guy out of completely putting that city into the toilet. I mean, it's not too far off from there now, unfortunately. They need somebody like Rudolph Giuliani again, despite how he's been beaten down and has problems, and the poor guy. I mean, in the 90s, late 90s, and up to, 9/11 and stuff like that, and Rudolph Giuliani was a giant. He turned things around like no one thought they could be turned around. And they don't want somebody like that back again. Bloomberg did some decent things for being a crazy narcissist, but he's a smart guy. He also didn't want to be thought of as being weak on crime or things like that. And he was essentially kind of a capitalist, because that's how he made his money, and he made a lot of it. So at least that was something that we could at least say, was understandable. But then, I mean, Dinkins and Adams himself was not all that sharp. And then, of course, we had de Blasio. They reelected de Blasio. I mean, he seems pleasant enough now. He's totally incompetent. I mean, if he's not, he certainly demonstrated it during his time as mayor. And there's always this, in these cities now, there's always this lingering sort of odor of corruption. Now, you can get it anywhere, especially with public money. There's nothing like handling a lot of public money and then having your buddies placed in positions of authority that doesn't begin to make it more attractive to just divert some of that sometimes. You know, you're a pretty hard worker. They're not paying you enough, really, right? So maybe if you just dip in there, you know. That seems to happen a lot, especially in cities, because there's so much money flying around. And a lot of it comes from outside the city. Remember, our cities are very vulnerable now. They are not anything like self-supporting. I don't know when we crossed that bridge to where the cities were so vulnerable to outside forces. I mean, maybe the 40s. It started getting that way, where so much of everything that was consumed, used in the cities were not manufactured there. It's always been that food, which is relatively important to people, is imported into cities. It doesn't take long for a city not to be growing its own food. Okay, that's one thing. But some of these cities no longer make anything, or anything of value that would, if we just concentrated what they produce themselves into that city, they'd never be able to meet the demand. So they become more and more susceptible to outside influence or outside issues. And you can see this. We live in a very fragile society. I'm not certain there's been a society that's been this fragile before, or if there was, I don't think it was something that was a large and enduring thing that we know much about. And I say that because of the very things we think empower us. Internet, cell phones, automobiles that have 30 chips in them, all this kind of stuff. We're very technological. And what runs the cities is the same way. And the speed at which we have become dependent on these kinds of things, nationally, and especially in cities, is a little breathtaking. Imagine for a minute that they were, say, in New York, Chicago, Houston, and in a 20-mile radius, they turned off all the cell phones. Somehow they were taken down. What do you think would happen? I'm not 100% sure, but I don't have a scenario that I can imagine that's good. And think about that 30 years ago. Big deal. Now, I think it would cripple society. Making yourself so dependent on some of these things is not a good thing. You know, don't put your eggs in one basket, all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you're doing here. We've also allowed ourselves to be fragile in terms of communication and the operation of society. One of the things that's happening is that foreign actors, China, and Russia a little bit, are very interested in ways to disrupt communication. And by communication, I don't just mean, on your cell phone. I mean the internet and even hardwired electronics. They look at us and realize that we are so much more dependent on that than they are. Now, that's probably because the lifestyle of most of their population doesn't lend itself to the kind of electronic gadgetry that we have, and that we completely need, apparently now. But if you look at some of the research that's being done, I mean, the Chinese communists, Chi-Coms as we should call them, are very interested in researching ways to bring the internet down, to jam GPS satellites, and as we talked about before, to take down satellites that we have in orbit. The Chinese have been launching for some time now satellites that we don't know what they're doing. And they're very peculiar because they don't seem to be doing much. So why are they up there? Well, some intelligence says there's satellites up there whose job is to knock out other satellites. And it's not that difficult. Their orbits and things like that are fairly fragile. Satellites themselves are fairly fragile because they are light. You try and keep things as light as possible to pop them into orbit because it's expensive per pound, per kilogram, or whatever you want to say. So they're not fragile necessarily for the environment they're in, but they're fragile to interference. I mean, you can have a $30 million satellite that if you took one swing at it with a baseball bat, that would be it. So you put a hunter-killer type satellite up that is in the same orbit, and all it has to do is detect its proximity to one of the other satellites and fire some sort of missile, nothing really all that sophisticated, and take things out. And there's actually some of the satellites, I think they're just purely mechanical. Deploy like an arm or something and go by a satellite, another satellite, and bang it up or something. And the reason that you spend money putting those up there is that we've become so dependent on our communication. And we think that because it's up in the air that it's safe. It's not. What's really fascinating is that our communications are based in two extremes. The satellites, orbital materials, and the ocean. We're not beaming everything that's being done back and forth with microwave receivers or any of that kind of stuff. It certainly is happening. But tremendous amount of communication that isn't bounced off or pushed through a satellite array goes through undersea cables. People are always surprised by this, but yeah, I'll look it up. I mean, a lot of direct communication, very important communication, is through a huge cable that runs through the ocean to someplace else. When those get cut, damaged, whatever the case may be, things get pretty crazy pretty fast. And we've had a few incidents of that. And lately we've had a couple of incidents where things seem to have happened to some of these undersea cables, mistake, accident, who knows, or maybe just a test to see what they can do. These things are not as fragile as satellites, but on the other hand, we know where they are, and there's a lot of things that's earthbound that we can do to interfere with them or destroy them. And when that happens, Katie bar the door. Once again, we're so dependent on those things. This kind of stuff is being studied out there all over the place amongst our enemies. And let's just face it, China is pretty much our enemy. I mean, I don't think that they're necessarily marching on us tomorrow, but as soon as they have enough of an advantage, they'd like to just push us out of world leadership, and then who knows what happens after that. Right now, one of the things that should never happen is that Russia and China cooperate with each other better than anybody of those two cooperate with us. Now, we've never actually been on the same page, but we've had ways of communicating with each one of those. There's this sort of trilateralism, right? This is the kind of thing that Britain did in the early 20th century. Well, before that, actually, too, is for quite some time. They spread themselves between France and Germany, or if you go back further, Spain and France, and they put themselves on the side of the slightly weaker, but still effective, to balance it out. Because it was better than letting the other guys get together. It's a narrow tightrope to walk. And we've tried to do it for a long time with China and Russia. And we've had some successes, not just because we've tried to work something in, but because for a long time, Russia and China while they were on the same side of the nickel in terms of just the general communism idea, did not see things the same way. And there was something there that we would exploit. Chinese communism and Russian, whatever it is now, quasi-communism, imperialism, I don't know what you want to call it, is not really congruent with each other, but they see an advantage to work together. It's sort of like the idea of Germany and Japan in World War II. Let's say, and this is a horrific thought, let's say they won the war. How long do you think that sort of alliance would last? Not very long. Germany, if they won the war, would probably be substantially more powerful, or certainly more spread out. And at some point, they're going to decide, hey, we need the whole thing here, and that's how that goes with these people. That's how it goes in general in history. And right now, if you look at what's going on with Russia and China, you can see what the problem will be. Yeah, they see an opportunity to push the United States out of the leading position, and once we tumble off that, who knows what happens. But at the same time, these guys understand, I think at some level, what's what. And what's what is that the Chinese like to see the Russians as a junior partner in all of this. The Russians got to put up with that now because they need the help. For instance, just in their space program, the Russians, since they've invaded Ukraine, have launched very little of anything. Their space program, such as it is, satellites, all that kind of stuff we're just talking about, is really dropped off. They don't have the wherewithal to put missiles around the planet and also throw them into Ukraine. So that's all dropped off. There have been a few launches of these mysterious things. We don't know what they do, but not nearly like there were. China hasn't pulled back from that. It increases all these kinds of things. And because of that, they feel as though they are the big brother in this situation. Now, that's probably true, but this is going to be a situation where it's a family where that's like a brotherly love situation. That's not going to last. As soon as they don't have a common enemy, that whole thing comes apart. And you can see how that would happen. Because once they feel like that the United States has been sufficiently pushed out, then they have different agendas about things. Different parts of the world, different things they need, different things they want. So it's just not going to hold up. And they have vastly different ideas about government, as crazy it is. Yeah, they're both dictatorships, essentially, but they are different in it. And Vladimir Putin's Russia, yeah, it looks a lot like the Soviet Union, but it's not really, and the Soviet Union wasn't really a true communist country. It called itself communism. But if you looked at what communism was supposed to be, it didn't have a whole lot of it. It also didn't have anything that it said it was going to do. You guys have heard Mark Levin and others that'll read you pieces out of the Soviet Constitution that sound great. Everybody's right to a job and housing and this is good. They're going to protect this, going to protect that. They didn't do any of it. They just wrote it and then published it and then did as they darn well pleased. So their whole philosophy of government was coherent as more of a authoritarian rule that just painted over with some ideas about, especially later on. What was it like maybe with Stalin? Probably a little bit more of the People's Republic stuff, as long as it didn't interfere with what he wanted to do. But as time went by, it became more and more of a facade for just an authoritarian way of government. Chinese are very much the same way now, although they have a little bit more ideology that they function with. But it's still not going to get in the way of personal power. So that piece can't stick together. But it could stick together long enough to make us have a real problem. And we need to just be aware of that. These people are not our friends. We already know that. Are they active enemies? Not exactly. But they sure look like they could become at least, sort of tangential. Russia's also testing all kinds of stuff in Europe. If you look at some of the Russian literature, there is quite a thought that the European Union and NATO in general is weak and disorganized, and that some gains can be made because of that. This last week, amidst all this other terrible news, Charlie Kirk, this poor girl, you name it, Russians flew some pretty serious drones through Polish airspace. Which, of course, they say, "Oh, how did that happen? That was a mistake." Well, the Poles don't think that. They're not that naive. And they've raised their threat level because they don't know exactly what's happening. The suspicion is it's just a test to see, just like the Russians like to do with us, which is fly some bombers, some SUs, off the coast of the Bering Straits and into Alaskan airspace and see how long it takes us to scramble fighters and what goes on. It's pushing our buttons to see what happens when those buttons get pushed. So it's probably something like that that's happened with the Poles. Is it indicative of a Ukrainian-type push into Poland? Not right now, probably. But don't think they wouldn't like to have Poland back in their sphere. Remember, the Soviet Union survived as well as it did. This is before it became a huge gas station for the whole country, for the whole world. But it survived mainly by draining resources off its eastern bloc. You have a lot of people there that you can decide what their prices are for things, what you're going to pay for things, what they can pay you to receive things from you. You run that like that, you can drain a lot of resources off those places, particularly some of the more productive ones. Czechoslovakia, what was once Czechoslovakia, of course, East Germany. These were pretty productive countries compared to the rest of even Russia itself. So they're able to drain a lot of resources off that and keep going. So, yeah, would they like to have that back? Sure. They have a little bit more of an independent way to make money because the natural resources that they've been developing are pretty important and are being bought by a lot of people who are developing themselves. India, for instance. We have to watch that. I mean, it's not just oil. They're also doing things like nickel and some of the rare earths that they might have. And the way they're developing is not healthy for the people doing it or for the people that they might use it with. We just got to start paying attention to the whole piece, It's a enigma wrapped in mystery.
Thanks for listening. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.